channel to our live stream Q&A part 3 this weekend, a special 4-part live stream this weekend coming at you because of Labor Day. We have our live stream lecture instead of Sundays at 4. We're doing it tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern on Labor Day, where I will be discussing the history of Labor Day, so I'm really looking forward to that. If you like history and social studies, you are in the right place. I suggest liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. We're coming to you live from the Friendly Neighborhood History Studio. With some upgrades, we got some new lighting. We have a new microphone we're checking out, so we're really looking forward to how this day plays out. As I look for a nice historical background, think about questions you may have about history and social studies. Drop them in the chat, and I'll be sure to answer them in a timely, friendly manner. It may take me a while as we go through things, but we do history in a neighborly, community way here, and we enjoy everybody who comes in and asks great questions about history, social studies, and the like. So, let us see. Get a nice background here, and then we're off to the races. How about this? Yeah, there's a lot of good historical backgrounds I could use based on particular historical eras and time periods and things like that. We do have a new green screen that we're going to be using when we get a new laptop, so I'm really excited for that. Some of the technology we've been able to update here on the Friendly Neighborhood History channel is really amazing, and we are going to be using all of the funds that you guys give through Super Chats and memberships and ad revenue in order to improve this channel, to make this studio better, to get better equipment like the microphone and the lighting, and just make everything as great and awesome as we possibly can for the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. So let's go with this image. This is an image, if you look closely, of a young man being crowned by a prelate, and it is Mikhail Romanov, the first Romanov Tsar, being crowned in 1613. So yes, it is. I am in my formal wear, and I'm in my Hugh Hefner smoking jacket. So when I wear this, I transform into History Hefner, so it's one of my favorite things to do. The robe is back. I don't care that I'm late. I really don't. So let's see here. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we bring you history in a friendly, neighborly manner. And hopefully I'm coming in clear. Hopefully the new microphone sounds good. The lighting is helping a little bit. We're trying to make the channel as attractive, appealing. Making me telegenic is really hard to do, but making the channel more appealing is obviously the end goal. So we've got a new microphone, we've got new lighting, and we're going to be getting newer and newer technology in the next couple of months to make the channel as nice as possible. So we're really looking forward to this. But this is Mikhail Romanov being crowned the first Romanov Tsar in 1613, a dynasty that would last over 3 centuries and take Russia all the way to the Russian Revolution. So really fascinating stuff. Let's see, what have we got in the chat? Nugs, good to see you. Harry and Hars holding down the chat, my wonderful moderators who do such a great job. Yes. Let me see. How can James Polk, the man who owned slaves, bought some during his time in office, was in the party that loved slavery, all things that are highly associated with slavery, not invade for slavery? Because there were other extenuating circumstances as to why the Mexican-American War happened. Many historians conclude that it was a land grab. I'm certainly one of the historians who do. It was done on false pretenses in order to seize more land of Mexico, more land of Texas that belonged to Mexico, and then to justify wars in the southwestern part of the United States as well as California. So, I mean, the idea that they did it just for the sake of slavery is not highly credited or supported in the historical accounts. Obviously, you have people who are perfectly fine with slavery, who may own slaves themselves, having no issue whatsoever with slavery. So I understand why people may think that, but there is and maybe it was a smaller co-benefit, side benefit of Polk's efforts, but really there's no evidence that the Americans started the Mexican-American War for the sake of promoting slavery, increasing the amount of democratic representation in Congress, or continuing the practice. Did you know the Hudson Bay Company, established by the British Empire, has only just gone into administrative dissolution? Interesting stuff. And yes, James K. Polk is one of the few presidents to fulfill his promise. And basically my back and forth with Harsonet is that Hars believes that Polk was a really bad president, and I happen to think that he was a pretty good one. You don't care, you are late. The less you care about about the people who care about you. So my father says, I'm sorry, I'm still thinking about how disingenuous my Substacks are. And yet you still manage to put them in the chat. He's also a rare president who promised to serve only 1 term. Yeah, well, he served only 1 term, and then he died right after the end. He was actually quite ill throughout much of his presidential term. So James K. Polk is kind of a mixed bag in many of those ways. He had a lot of health conditions. He was extremely sickly. He knew he wasn't going to be able to fulfill his entire another term. It's a fascinating story about James K. Polk, but promising to serve only 1 term 4 years before your term is up is really pretty impressive. Back when Japan originally stratified and became hyper-feudal, what was China and Korea like? Similar. Almost every civilization, major civilization, had some sort of form of stratification. They were less developed than the Chinese feudal system that's gotten a lot of attention because of the samurai and the Bushido. So I say that James Polk was doing the action for as much benefit as possible for himself and his popularity. Yeah, that's if you want to assume bad motives and bad faith regarding the American president, then certainly go ahead and do that with James K. Polk. But I just don't see that when I look at the historical narrative. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. A happy Labor Day weekend to you, and to our third Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where you can ask me about any particular historical topic you want. We will be going for the next hour talking about history and social studies, so please drop a like and subscribe if you enjoy that kind of stuff. If you're coming back to us, welcome back. It's good to see you again. My moderators are holding down the chat, and we're going to have a really good conversation here. We're going to go for about an hour or so today, and then tomorrow is our live stream lecture on the topic of Labor Day. So a happy Sunday to all of you. Hopefully you all have some great 3-day weekend plans, and thank you for including us in your 3-day weekend plans. We really appreciate it as we are trying out new equipment and updating a lot that we do here. We've got a new microphone. We've got new lighting. We're really, really enjoying it. So I say that Japan's feudal system is so interesting, so they measured in Koku, which was a plot of land that produced enough rice for one person a year. Yep. They were literally like squaring off how much rice they could measure because Japan does not have a lot of farming land, and terrace farming was extremely common. Let me see here. UK Strains Crisis King. Oh, I see Nick Fuentes is into the chat. Hello, Solomon. But you can't say that it is unrealistic for people to believe slavery one of the big factors. No, it's not unrealistic, but it's wrong. Tell me about my life. I don't know, Sid. I would love to know the history of your life. I have much more to say to you, more than you can now bear, but when he, the spirit of truth... Oh, you're quoting from Scripture. Okay. All right. So, does anyone have questions about history or social studies or the like? I'm not depressed. Not depressed at all. No, somebody just said Christ is king in the chat, and that's kind of the thing he does, so that I'm making a joke about that. But anyways, most people at the time opposed the Mexican-American War. It was considered immoral and wrong. It was neither of those. I mean, it was what every empire did at one point or another. Was it immoral? Yes. Was it wrong? Probably. But the idea that the United States simply just stole land is not a fair assessment of what actually happened. The United States actually not only won the war overwhelmingly, but actually occupied most of Mexico and could have annexed large sections of Mexico, but decided not to do so. So, mention Begin, the commander of the Irgun from 1943 onward. He ordered major operations and eventually became Prime Minister of Israel. Yes, I know who mentioned Begin is. But yeah. So, anyways, please like if you haven't done already. Tell about the future ancient life, about future development, Uptanon Pyramid. I don't know what that is, Sid, so you're out of luck on that one too. So yes, let's see. What kind of questions do we have in the chat? What kind of history do you guys want to talk about? We're going to go for another 50 minutes or so talking about all things Friendly Neighborhood History here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel. And I'm going to take a sip of coffee because for once the chat is just not flowing with a bunch of questions. So it's actually a time for me to take a little bit of a break and have some coffee. Please follow us on the social media handles that my wonderful moderator put in there. So I'm not ignoring your questions. So you do agree James K. Polk was heavily associated with slavery. When it comes to American presidents who are known for their slaves, Polk is not one of them, but he did own slaves and he didn't mind about slavery. He supported slavery. What question am I ignoring, Manu? Oh, come on. America didn't have an empire. The Americans had diddly squat for an empire. I love it. I love it. An act of American imperialism, you talk about being immoral and wrong, and then when I say the Americans built an empire like the British and all the other empires did, you say they didn't have much of an empire anyways. Who actually owned the Koh-i-Noor? I don't know. I'm not sure about the future. I use history in the past to help judge the future. What do you know on Greek Roman mythologies? Quite a bit. The Romans took a lot of their mythologies, although not all of them from the Greeks, and adapted them to their own situations. For instance, Heracles was his actual Greek name. The Romans turned it into Hercules, the man who did 12 labors and the god known for his strength, demigod. So, yes. To be fair, Harry, he's going after that thing like you go after the British Empire, so. Okay. Please like and subscribe if you haven't. Help the algorithm out, and drop a question, comment, or topic about history or social studies you'd like me to discuss in the chat. So, yeah, let's see what happens over the next 45 minutes or so as we go on. No Simon today. That's unfortunate, but I'm sure he's busy with something. Yeah, Jupiter was considered the greatest Roman god. And Jove is what the Brits call him. Why did Hitty hate Jews? Um, Anti-Semitism was extremely prevalent in the early 20th century in Europe, and the Germans, especially the Nazis, needed a scapegoat for why they lost the war. The fact that their Bolshevik communist adversaries were disproportionately Jewish in their leadership gave them a leeway into blaming Jews, Jewish bankers, and just delving into old and ancient stereotypes that had existed in Europe for over a millennia, and using that to persecute the Jews and obviously do horrible and unspeakable things to them throughout the 1930s and 40s. So basically, it was a lack of accountability or taking responsibility. American Eagle is true successor of Roman Eagle. Oh, geez. I see Sydney Sweeney has entered the chat. Thank you, Andre. I really appreciate it. That's so nice of you to say. Do you think that the United States will continue to be ruled by the mob, by women and men will become the new progressives, kind of like an opposite of the last 250 years of U.S. history? I don't know what you mean by that question. The state of Israel is an ethno state. Please discuss. No. I mean, no more so than France is an ethno state. No more so than Great Britain is an ethno state. I mean, what state is not ethnic other than the United States? It's a fun thing to say that in the United States because the United States is not an ethnic state, and Canada kind of is a bi-ethnic state. Some people in the United States consider the United States to be a biracial country. You got African Americans and whites for the majority of American history, but you have various different types of whites who were not considered to be white. So America is certainly not an ethnic country. But yeah, clearly I am a clown. Please tell us about the fall of the Ottomans. Good to see you, Ice Cold Splash. Basically, the Ottomans were heavily punished for their part in the Great War. They gave up large sections of their territories to the interests of Greece and Bulgaria and other Balkan adversaries that were licking their chops after their defeat, after the Ottomans' defeat. Eventually, the empire collapsed. It had become corrupt, bloated, and overextended, and it clearly was a shell of its former self, especially after losing all the territory at the end of the war. The Middle Eastern states were divided by the British and the French, with them creating mandates in Iraq and Palestine and Syria and Iran and later what would become Saudi Arabia. The Ottomans fell apart from there, and Mustafa Kemal Ataturk got them a more decent agreement to end the war, the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, which gave the Turks back some of the land that the Europeans, like the Bulgarians, had taken from them. But yes, what happened next is that that ended the Ottoman Empire and brought about the Republic of Turkey. So in the last 250 years of U.S. history, men ruled everything, and masculinity was how everyone acted. Right now, the U.S. is more feminine and dominated by women in government. Yes, the U.S. president and his vice president, his secretary of state, his secretary of treasury, his secretary of war, they are all women. Britain is having protests because of nationalism. Britain has been having this problem for a while. Please tell us, okay, I already answered that. Compare that to the British, French, and even the Belgian, the Dutch, the German empires. The American one was tiny. Not when you consider the massive landmass it had compared to the Belgians and the Dutch. Clearly not the behemoth of the British, French, or German empires, or even the Russian, because the Russian Empire was considered an empire without major colonization. So you can have an empire with just one landmass. I guess you don't have the political structures of an empire with the United States because you have a president who is not really an autocrat, and you have checks and balances. So I guess you can't say America's an empire, but the 20th century saw the reworking of empire into a hegemonic style that the United States certainly fulfilled during the Cold War. Let me see here. Going through the chat. Nationalism isn't always bad. Do you understand that, right, Hassan? Were there any Zoroastrian states after the Muslims conquered Persia? Not that I know of. It was definitely a subculture throughout the eastern part of the Middle East that was heavily persecuted, or at least did not have a political power. I mean, when people talk about the tolerance of Islam and Muslim empires and kingdoms and caliphates, that's definitely true. There was a level of religious tolerance, but no more so than comparably a system of segregation where they were clearly the underclass compared to the Muslim conquerors. So, for instance, you could make the same. It's almost like a form of segregation or apartheid, where these people were not heavily mistreated because they did not become Muslim. The reason that modern historians and modern analysts point out that Islam was relatively tolerant is because when you compare it to radical Islam and modern incarnations of that, which is extremely violent and intolerant, it seems relatively tolerant, and it is relatively tolerant. In many ways, it was more tolerant than the Europeans at that time, but it is not necessarily more tolerant than the than other societies that had segregated societies. They definitely were an underclass, and so the Zoroastrians would have fit into that. Nikton, you can ask me anything you'd like about history or social studies. And the Russians have numerous groups, yes, but there's different ethnic groups in Russia, but obviously the Russians themselves are very aware of what makes a Russian a Russian. Let me see. Great question about Zoroastrianism. So will women rule the U.S. government and feminism grow more and more over the next 250 years? I don't think so. Feminism has become relatively popular, especially in its modern incarnation. I think there's a much more egalitarian spirit that Americans seem to hold, and is kind of an ideal that they work towards. Yes, there is extreme nationalism, and then there is nationalism. Nationalism is wanting strong military, limited immigration, pretty normal stuff. Yes, we all know Harry is a socialist and a nationalist. He is a national socialist. Just saying. People consider Japan to be a brilliant country, yet it is extremely nationalist in the way it views itself. Most countries are extremely nationalist. Nationalism is the norm throughout human history, not multiculturalism. Have you seen the movie The Kingdom of Heaven? No, but I really want to. Ridley Scott's a great director, and of course, it's not a greatly accurate representation of Balban IV and Saladin, but it's obviously extremely important. Yeah, definitely. There were enclaves of Christian, Zoroastrian resistance to Muslim states was common. Definitely. Instead of men oppressing women causing progressive movements, it might be women oppressing men leading to mental health and social issues. Some people think that's already happening. But those are subcultures. I don't see that as a major, is the culture itself, is the dominant narrative, is that is what needs to happen between men and women. Those are subcultures within feminism. It's not about history. Do you believe in aliens, UFOs? It would be hard for me to look at the vast expanses of the universe and how diverse it actually is and only assume that planet Earth could house beings. I don't know what aliens would be like, what they would look like. I don't believe in traditional narratives about them. There's definitely UFOs, UAP. We don't know what it is exactly. So I'm open. I'm not an agnostic. I'm skeptically open to it, cautiously open to it. Anybody standing on U.S. soil can be forcefully thrown out into another country with or without due process of law. No. No, I'm on about modern-day Japan, which was extremely tight immigration controls, has a very nationalistic education system, and has a very high opinion of itself. Yes, I wonder what other country that doesn't have that has a nationalized education system, but doesn't have any immigration controls, has a very high opinion of itself in Western Europe, Harry. How has Iran become so different? I've seen pictures of women in exposing clothing. Why the dispute between the U.S. and Iran? Great question, dyslexic. Basically, in the 1950s, the United States and Great Britain tried to heavily influence the Iranian government for the sake of their oil relations, but also to try to prevent communism and the Soviet Union from influencing the government. They didn't want a socialist revolution in Iran. This led to the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh, the prime minister of Iran, who was eventually assassinated. The discontent led to several different groups within the country. There was a Shah, a king, who ruled over the Persian people and was pretty much a dictator for all intents and purposes. The United States and Britain supported him because he was anti-communist and he was an ally to the U.S. and he was good for the oil industries. British Petroleum had a particularly high influence in Iran. However, the Iranian people were very divided. Some of them were royalists and loyalists to the king. Many of them considered themselves to be Persian rather than Iranian. Some of them were open to socialism, were open to more leftward ideas or liberal democracy. And some of them were, and there was a strong traditional Muslim sect that believed that what had happened was totally unacceptable and that Allah would punish the country unless they had a Muslim revolution. And that eventually, of course, is what happened. Basically, revolution started with the far left, liberal Democrats, and traditional Muslims all protesting the regime and the oppression of the Shah. The Shah was eventually overthrown and fled power. Then the Islamic Revolution happened, where basically the hardcore Islamists, Shia Muslims, the mullahs, led by the Ayatollah Khomeini, overthrew, conned the other groups and took political power, and then basically turned on all these other groups that had helped them overthrow the Shah. So they banned the Communist Party. So the socialists, the liberals, they didn't get anywhere. The Shah was overthrown. He went to the United States and died from cancer a couple years later. The Islamic Republic embraced an extremely strict version of Sharia law, where you had more restrictive clothing for women, where you had less of educational access and less egalitarianism. And so the United States, their immediate attitude was that the United States was evil, the British were evil, and Israel was evil. So for 46 years, the United States has been has been fighting a kind of a cold war, you could say, with the Iranian Islamic Republic. But yes, and Steve, by the way, that's me informing someone without making an argument. Let me see. If aliens are real, I hope they're peaceful. Me too, Itachi. Can we get a vote to deport friendly history? That'd be fun. Yes, Harry is he's a nationalist and a socialist. So he's a national socialist. Let me see, going through the chat. Let me see here. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is heavy dictatorship to the extreme, where do you rate Hitler? I don't mind saying it. It's not a bad word. I mean, I find it absolutely absurd that Stalin killed more people than Hitler. Yet we can talk about Stalin and communism and the Bolsheviks ad nauseum without any fear of demonetization or of being controversial. Yet Hitler, who was awful, who was a horrible human being, if we can't mention his name without trying to throw pseudonyms or nom de guerres or different things like that, Hitty or the Austrian artist, we have to throw we have to be very subtle about the way we talk about Nazism and the Holocaust in Germany. And no, I don't think any of these words should be banned. I think we should be able to freely express and talk about it. I mean, I got a video banned on TikTok where I simply said that Brazil had a fascist government just like Portugal, Spain, and the Nazis. And that got taken down because I was promoting violent extremism, because I simply stated a historical fact. That is absurdity, in my opinion. You should be allowed to talk about these things openly without any fear of any repercussions, unless you are inciting violent or harm to children, unless you are exposing minors in one horrific way or another. Then I think you should be allowed to basically say whatever you want and support and have any ideas you want and be able to say it without being worried about being deplatformed, debanked, or any of the other nonsense that goes on in some of these Western countries that supposedly idolize free speech. And if that's demonetizing, I don't care. For this live stream. But Manu, basically, I'd say Hitler is an 8 or a 9. Obviously, I mean, when you it's hard not to say 10 because almost every nasty, horrible dictator is a 10. And Hitler was an awful human being. But when you consider the scale of dictatorship, the scale of authoritarianism, Hitler did not have as pervasive a dictatorship in some ways as Stalin or Mao. Mao was able to fall out of favor, fall back into favor, corrupt an entire generation, and then unleash another round of killings of millions of people. The death tolls, the totalitarianism, the very fact that Pol Pot, who was thrown out of power because the communist Vietnamese felt that he was too far, tells you everything you need to know. That would be more of a 10. But Hitler is definitely right up there. What if Vladimir the Great kept reforming Slavic paganism instead of converting to Orthodoxy? You think it would have worked out long term? No. The pressure, I have an entire series on Russian history that I talk about, where I talk about this, and Russian czars, and I talk about Vladimir the Great and the Kievan Rus and their conversion to Christianity and Prince Olga. So go check out those videos, YouTube search. But basically, I do think that more or less Christianity was becoming more and more popular in that area. There was conversions, there was the Cyrillic alphabet, there was the promulgation of Catholic and especially Orthodox Christianity, and Olga had a huge amount of influence. And Sviatoslav was not able to bring them back to paganism despite the fact that he was a pagan. And so Vladimir embracing Christianity, when that happened, it basically meant that your subjects would all embrace Christianity. So, there you go. Yes, Harry is not a communist. He is not. What is your ranking of Donald Trump on the Aura scale? Oh, jeez. I don't want to do that right now. Hi, Nam. Do you have the Telegram streams? I prefer closed area network. Fair enough, but no, I don't have Telegram. The only reason Stalin and Mao aren't as controversial to Westerners is because they weren't hecking racist. I mean, it's obviously wrong to be racist, but Stalin was certainly a racist. Stalin was planning a massive pogrom against the Jews right before his death, was already starting to persecute them before he died. Stalin absolutely hated Westerners. I don't think there was any room at the table for blacks in Maoist China. The communism talks a big game about being ostensibly anti-racist, but the communists, Marx himself, is a horrible racist. It's only modern definitions of communism that allow for cultural Marxism, which is far more interested in the plight of races as underclasses representing the have-nots. Stalin, I don't buy the notion that these communists were not racist. Let me see here. Let me see. This man just shouted Islam Okami at me through the Popeyes drive-thru. Funny. I'd have to come up with my own political party. Should be political home. Yes. Or you could just join the Reform Party like everyone else in Great Britain is doing, Harry. William Patrick Hitler. His mother was Irish woman Bridget Downing, and his father, Alois Jr., was Adolf Hitler's half-brother, who worked for 3 years in the early 20th century, worked at Dublin's motel. Interesting. Hotel. Thank you for sharing that, Dublin. Let me see here. Mao was not a good person. Not only in the way that he ran his country, but in his personal life. Who shot JFK and MLK? I think James Earl Ray killed MLK. I think that somebody else killed Kennedy other than Lee Harvey Oswald, and I don't think we're going to know who that is anytime soon. Are we hating on commies? We're hating on commies and fascists and National Socialists and all sorts of people. Why have so many Eastern Bloc countries joined the Soviet Union and not Europe? Well, they were basically forced to, because when the Soviet Union pushed the Germans out of their country in the last World War, which I consider to be World War III, you have the emergence of you have them going all the way to Berlin and conquering a bunch of these areas that belong that formerly had been occupied by the Nazis, and then basically forcing their governments to adopt some sort of communist model. So I don't think that Poland and Hungary really embraced communism by choice. And if you look at the 1920s, both of those countries had fought vigorously to go against communism. Do you like Yitzhak Rabin? The square has good energy, but ugly 1960s buildings. Not sure. I don't know what you mean. What do you think of Zimbabwe going from a successful country into British rule to a complete mess while independent? I think you have the failures of kleptocratic communism. You have Mugabe's kleptocracy. You have corruption. I mean, it's common for people to say that the Europeans are the reasons that Africa is poor. First off, most European countries have decolonized for more than 60 years. And while there are definitely long-term effects of colonization that are very deleterious to the African countries in post-colonial relations, such as France trying to continue to put pressure on its former colonies to be very French one way or another, economic and social cooperation, that doesn't mean that that isn't the. I don't think colonization can be the reason. Liberia was not colonized, and yet Liberia suffers just as much as the other African nations. Ethiopia was not colonized, really, suffers just as much. You have dictatorships, you have authoritarianism, you have a rejection of any sort of free market or innovation in that area. You have bureaucrats, kleptocrats. You have all of that going on. I think there are myriad reasons why Africa is in the position it is. One of the reasons is definitely European influences and the extractive economies of the British, French, and German empires, as well as the Portuguese, Italians, whatever. But there is more than just that. Leopold II is definitely a horrible, horrible individual. What he did to the Belgians is absolutely, undeniably awful and should be condemned. And I don't know, it doesn't hit the same scale as the Stalin or Hitler, but it's terrible. They think they aren't racist because they see certain groups as lower humans. Adolf Hitler's brother was for 3 years in the early... Yes, you mentioned that. Thank you, Dublin. Is this Hugh Hefner's dressing gown? This is my smoking jacket. In 19th century tradition, British soldiers coming back from the Crimean War would get Turkish tobacco, and they would smoke it, and they would wear smoking jackets to prevent it from getting on their street clothes. Let me see here. Who killed Malcolm X? Most likely a representative of a Nation of Islam. Just because that empire, a lot of good as well, and the British Empire was nowhere near as bad as Belgians were in Congo and the French were in Africa. Let me see here. Where are we? If you look at the former color, you'll state that most of these successful ones will be for former British colonies. Other than the fact that you misspelled color, you are right, Harry. And some are still extracting resources. That's definitely true. What do you think of socialism fixing housing crisis and making walkable and livable city blocks? Where is that happening? Is it wrong to purchase cotton from countries in Central Asia, South Asia, and Africa that predominantly use manual labor to harvest cotton? That's the old sweatshop debate. Is it moral to get products that come from sweatshops? It's a tough one. One of the reasons people like the tariffs is because in the United States there's a moral component to it of punishing China for sweatshops and for persecutions of minority groups and stuff like that. So I'm not sure. I just can't fully speak to it. I give my opinion when I have an informed historical background on it. This is something that getting materials and supplies from people that are underpaid and mistreated is something that has existed for all of human history. eradicating that may be just as idealistic as getting rid of poverty or war. If gravity bends space and time, is it technically racist towards history? Oh, geez. No, most of them got independence and negotiation, gradual independence, kind of. How can you say no, National Socialism doesn't work when you see what Germany became compared to Weimar Germany, at least just before World War II? What I consider to be World War III. I definitely don't think that. Let me put it to you this way. You can have a government that makes reform. I mean, Stalin industrialized, but at what cost? What are the costs? And what are the trade-offs? And what are the social mores? And what is life like in Nazi Germany because of this? I think that rounding up and killing 6 million Jews and 5 million other non-desirables far outweighs any of the benefits of Goering's 4-year plans that boosted the German economy. There is no doubt that the Nazis definitely made a blitzkrieg economically and socially to reform, to get back on their feet after Germany had been hit hard by the Great Depression. But that doesn't excuse it. It's one of those things where even the benefits of economic progress can be overweighed when you look at the moral cost of it. The same thing happened with Stalin. So, let me see here. Not currently, but in the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, to those people, what were the trade-offs for that? I mean, there was definitely examples of providing housing. What kind of housing was it? These are the same people who didn't have any wages and said they pretend to pay us, so we pretend to work. What happened in Yugoslavia was that Tito was successful at solving the ethno crisis that was happening of the different multinational groups that had occupied that region, and so he was far more beloved and far more benevolent than a Stalin-like figure. The Holodomor. What is the trade-off, as Charlie's pointing out? The Holodomor would be that trade-off. Let me see here. He didn't misspell color. American English is not the only English on the planet. Yeah, but it's the best one. Was killing of those people necessary for that to happen? No, not necessarily. In 1964, the USA were using Taiwan as a staging point to train U.S. troops in bomb positions in North Vietnam. Fair or not? Well, Taiwan was one of the allies, so the Americans used Japan as its base of operations during the Korean War. Whenever I go into my Jewish friend's home, I up VR just in case it happens again. Oh, jeez. No, just no. Okay, does anyone have any questions about history or social studies? Anything else we want to talk about regarding this? We've got another half hour for our third Q&A, part 3 of 4. We're doing 4 live streams this weekend because of Labor Day. We've been enjoying it. We had fun Friday and Saturday, so we're doing another hour on history and social studies today, where you can ask me anything you'd like about history, social studies, and everything. Was Darwin racist? Yes, but social Darwinism, paternalism, all of that really was developed by other people later on. I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who coined the term survival of the fittest. Darwin did not use that term, but Darwin wasn't thinking about races when he made The Origin of Species and the Generations of Man. So I wouldn't say that he was, he was racist, certainly, but he wasn't the creator of social Darwinism. Darwinism, when it's applied to human context and to societal and technological and civilizations, but it wasn't applied to that, but that was a social and sociological reinterpretation of Darwinism, not based on the biological theory that he had created. He didn't even create it. He reinterpreted earlier ideas of evolution. What are your thoughts on Calvin Coolidge? One of the better presidents that we don't talk about enough. Compared to modern-day housing, which is mostly quickly built and quiet had for bigger profits, and compares to previous imperial housing, communist and socialist housing, and still better quality. No, it wasn't. I mean, yes, it was readily available and cheap, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good quality. The buildings were falling apart. I mean, look at the infrastructure of any communist society within 60 years or 50 or 40 years after it starts to rebrand. Not only is the artistic and architectural design ugly, but the people are living in squalor. Racism, there's different levels to it. Certainly. Social Darwinism was made by rich people to justify their greed, also to justify European colonization and which civilization is better. Absolutely. With the outfit on, you look like you should have a cigar. I wish I had a cigar right now. I don't smoke in the studio, but this is my smoking jacket. Turns me into History Hefner. Thank you, James. I really appreciate that. Yep, it's not quite Baroque. It could be Baroque, actually, but it's the crowning of Mikhail Romanov as the first Russian Romanov Tsar in 1613, ending the time of troubles and starting a new era for the Russian people. Check out my Russian history videos, as well as my series on the Russian Tsars, and my video where I talk about I rank the Russian Tsars on the tier ranking. So go check those out. How did Mari paganism manage to survive unbroken into modern day? It did. What is Mari paganism? In 1857, Joseph Getty in the United States introduced the first commercially packaged toilet paper sold as medicated paper for the water closet. Each sheet was moist with aloe and marketed as a medical product. Sounds nice, actually. Sounds pleasant. Can you draw a parallel in history to immigration in Europe today? Mass migration of this number has never been seen. But again, if you're looking at proportionality, because the world population used to be a lot smaller, I would say the great waves of immigration into the United States in the late 19th century. Patrick, great to see you as always. What do you think happened to the princes in the tower? I think Richard III starved them. Edward V and his brother, also named Richard, were starved by their uncle Richard III, who, by the way, when his body was discovered, it turned out he did have a little bit of a hunchback, so Shakespeare wasn't just making crap up. He made crap up when he did Macbeth. If you had a cane and lothers, you could complete the look. Yep, that would be nice, actually. But it's so hot. I'm barely hanging on with this. Why did the Catholic Church change it from the Pope being elected by the people of the city of Rome to the cardinals? Once you get a more stratified religious apparatus, you obviously want the people, rather than having it be a democratic election, you want to have it be a clerical election. So as the Catholic Church grew and had a larger and larger number of bishops and cardinals representing larger and larger areas, it made more sense to have them as the prelates vote. If you look at the New Testament, there are several examples of people being selected by the leaders of the church. And so maybe it was trying to be more biblical. Maybe it was trying to legitimize the papacy and turn it from less of a social institution and more into a spiritual one. Remember, after the Roman Empire in the West fell in 476 AD, the Roman Catholic Church became the major political institution. Although it didn't have as much political power or sway as the Roman Empire, it had far more religious say on Christendom and the developing European countries like the Kingdom of the Franks and the Anglo-Saxons, and later the Holy Roman Empire in Germany and Austria and Bohemia. But great question. Well, I mean, I told you what's actually happened in Ireland, and you've sort of just quietly ignored it almost because I'm right. What's happened in Ireland? Did the common Russian person live better under the Tsars or the communists? Oh, that's a tough one. I would say it's almost a toss-up. In many ways, I'd say the Tsars, because you do have repression, you have serfdom, but you don't have an ideological system that basically deprives you of basic rights in the name of giving into this bureaucratic apparatus that is considered to be the state, the party. You do have patriotism, nationalism, all of these things, extractive features in an absolutist, a neo-absolutist empire in Russia under the Tsars. But I think you also have some really, really good Tsars who made great changes for their people and made life better for them, like Alexander II, the great liberator. So I think it's more about, do you prefer patriotism or communitarianism? And I think that in many ways it was really bad for them under the Tsars. You obviously have a mechanized, modernized system under the Soviet Union that was better and did provide for basic needs, or at least said it did, which is what I'm talking about with Garga. This person who lives in a communist bloc, I can vouch for the quality of the building, at least compare it to the 15-year-old building where I lived before. Interesting. That's fascinating because I've heard absolutely the opposite from lots of people who lived in the Eastern Bloc. But thank you for sharing your experience. Under communists, but the average American lived better under capitalism. That is also true. So in the 1970s, they actually measured this, and the Soviet Union, they had about 1/4 of the people had a refrigerator, or something like that. Whereas, of course, in the United States, there's an overwhelming majority. So historians have used that to argue, well, you see, the standard of life wasn't that bad in the Soviet Union. Well, compare it to the West, and you see that it was completely provincial. That's why communist officials who came to the United States and saw the standard of living said, we can't keep up with these people in the 1980s. It's not the United States capitalism that fell. It was communism in the Soviet Union that fell because it had become overbloated, corrupt, and the people hated it. And the people in East Germany weren't exactly staying in their houses at night when they misread an interpretation to tear down the Berlin Wall. They ran over to the West Side. It's not that I don't think that there were benefits to living in the Soviet Union or in the communist bloc. I'm just saying that the voting by the feet shows that people didn't want to live that way anymore. And I don't think you can blame Western propaganda on it because they were pretty repressive about free speech and access to Western materials in the Eastern Bloc countries. Remember, he added the three witches to the beginning of the Scottish play to charm James I, who had just written a pamphlet about witchcraft. He also he was a patron, and that's why he wrote Macbeth the way he did. Go check out my video on Macbeth to learn more about Shakespeare. God loves Bitcoin? Who knows? What do you think of Lord Salisbury? One of the better British leaders, to be sure. They were little rural serfs, man. Yes, serfdom was quite common. How is that any different than collectivism and the kulaks being exterminated and liquidated by Stalin? I don't know that the farmers got it any better under the Bolsheviks. With billions of dollars now headed to win the presidency of the United States, at what stage in democracy does electing representatives actually require people? Um, what do you mean by that? People, the money is used to buy votes, to buy influence, to buy importance, and to get your message out there because it's all about the people, at least ostensibly. Pope, yes, many popes led armies. The papal states were their own mini kingdom in Europe, and the Pope led many Pope Julius or Julian, Pope Julius, the one who commissioned Michelangelo, led forces into battle. Many popes led forces into battle. What was the Catholic Church doing in World War II, what I call World War III? So I've heard some recent rumblings that the conventional narrative is not true, but basically you had Pope Pius XI, who was pretty adamantly opposed to the fascist and to not to fascism in Italy, but to Nazism. He dies before he can really take a stand on it. Pius XII kind of toes the line. Obviously, the Vatican area had been given to the popes by the Lateran Treaty of Mussolini, and so Pius XII is considered historically to have toed the line and kind of let the Nazis and kind of been mini mouth about condemning Nazism and standing up to Nazism. That being said, many Catholic priests abandoned their posts or abandoned their teachings to support the Nazis. Many Catholics in Germany obviously were Nazis. Many Catholics, prelates, and leaders supported the Nazis in one way or another and liked the nationalism. The Catholics in Spain had supported the nationalism of Francisco Franco. But there were also many other Catholic priests who risked their lives and died to save Jews. Many Jews were saved through the Vatican. Many hundreds of thousands of Jews were protected through different interventions through different Catholic leaders, including the Vatican itself, during the Holocaust. So it's obviously a mixed bag that typically turns out pretty bad when you consider the fact that there could have been some kind of widespread condemnation from the leader of the Catholic world, and there was not. The Catholic Church is the conclusion of the Roman Empire, follows the teachings of St. Paul and Peter perfectly. I don't know that St. Paul and St. Peter were teaching in the New Testament what the good things about the Roman Empire. Mr. Beast currently streaming, spend millions to make it. Well, that's where everybody is today. I don't know. I'm not going to spend millions to make it. Knowing history, would you time travel to the past or future? I want to go to the past. I want to live through different historical epochs, but you got to be very careful where you go. What was the Catholic? Okay, I answered that. Was life for the average person in the Austro-Hungarian Empire better or average than the countries that came in after it in the two world wars? That's a great question. I'm not sure. You obviously have a huge issue of racial divides. Obviously, the Yugoslavians figured out under Tito how to handle this. So in a way, it was a lot better. There wasn't the ethnic divides in the 50s and 60s that there have been in the 1910s and 20s. Yes, thank you, YouTubes. I really appreciate that. Thank you. It's good to see you. Corzo, always a pleasure. History of the class system in England. Is it systematically racist? If California has a class system, would it have been so wealthy and innovative? No, not necessarily. The British class system is not necessarily based on race, but based on where you live, your economic standing, and kind of your ancestry. The British have a much more detailed understanding of landed gentry and patronage between the middle and between lower and working classes and the middle upper classes. And this is carried over in kind of a diminished form from the feudal era, and it's common throughout all of Europe. It's not just in Britain. Do you think if the UK had a revolution in 1832 instead of last-ditch reforms, there would have been a world war considering the European powers were eyeing up the British Empire? No, I don't think Britain... I think it would have been very similar to the French Revolution. Gallipoli campaign was a disaster. Yeah, noble idea, interesting idea, but just wasn't executed properly. Julius II. Yep, that's the guy. And if the British Empire was in the Civil War, there would be no way it could defend colonial holdings. Yes, they would have lost all of them, so there wouldn't have been a world war because they would have just lost. Catholic areas within Germany tended to vote hard against National Socialist policies. True, but there were plenty of German Catholic Nazis. We've got to be honest about all of this. What could have happened? What could have happened if the Connecticut Compromise never happened? They went out. They may have went the way with the New Jersey plan. No, I think the Virginia plan, the more populist form for the legislative government, would have probably prevailed. How come the USA Today doesn't recognize Palestine as an independent nation, but a letter from HDR to Hitler not to attack these independent nations, Palestine was on that list? I I think the U.S. obviously has some sort of deference to Israel and has some sort of wants to protect Jewish and Israeli interests. You have a large Jewish population in the United States. I've talked about this ad nauseum, especially this last weekend. I'm absolutely sick of it, to be honest with you, Stephen. But I'll answer your question because I think it's asked in good faith. Um, there's definitely an affinity for Israel. There's a desire to have Israel as a satellite state in the Middle East for U.S. geopolitical relations, especially in the wake of the rise of radical Islam in that area with areas like Iran. But I also think that, generally speaking, it's cold. There's a Cold War dichotomy where the Soviet Union supported the plight of the Arabs and the Palestinians only because they felt the Israelis were just capitalists, and so even though the Israelis practiced many forms of socialism, they felt that they were an imperialist outpost of the Americans. And of course they had no affinity for Islam. So it goes back to the Cold War. It goes back to U.S. relations with Israel. It goes back to the fact that many evangelical Christians have a special place for Israel based on their theology. There's many different reasons why that's the case. Um, I think California is very wealthy. It doesn't necessarily, but many people would argue it has a class system. Many people would argue that America has a class system. It just doesn't have. It had it before the revolution, but America doesn't have as big of a landed gentry issue as Britain and France does in its past. With deep friend Mars bars and I'm brew being Scottish equivalency of haute cuisine, would hope have a Celt's god. Interesting. Um, yeah. I like your threads. Yes, it's my smoking jacket. I appreciate that. Um, let's see. What would have been the impact if Ottoman borders didn't stop in modern day Croatia and Hungary and reached all the way to the Venetian Republic and the Holy Roman Empire? You probably would have had. I don't think that they would have stopped there. I think they would have continued. I think they wanted to destroy the Holy Roman Empire and unseat the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs would have lost control of Central Europe. The Holy League would have failed. They would have taken sections of Italy, and probably the Pope would have had to crawl on his knees to beg for the ability to keep the papacy going. I think the Ottomans would have been quite ruthless with the Western Christians, just as they had been with the Eastern Christians. What if Zoroastrianism made a comeback in Iran? That'd be interesting. I just don't expect it to be. When was race invented? Race has always existed as the physical characteristics of ethnic groups in particular areas, and people have different ethnicities and are considered the same race. But the idea of modern racial definitions really emerges more and more as the Europeans fill out the global map and come into contact with people who they consider to be inferior. And one of the reasons they consider to be inferior is because of their physical differences from European looks. So that could be skin color, the shapes of eyes and noses, things like this. If you look at, we were talking about social Darwinism earlier, what's real fascinating is there were books produced in the 19th century that explained the racial differences and the reason for racial inferiority based on the size of skull shape of Middle Eastern and South Asian people by the British and by other peoples at that time. Let me see here. David, good to see you. Been a while. And yes, Gallipoli wasn't a success, but it wasn't that big a disaster you're making it out to be. Yes, I've never said Gallipoli was a huge disaster. What would happen? Everyone would have been subjected under Sharia. You had some of that during the different Muslim. It depends on how tolerant the Muslim caliphate wants to be, because Sharia law has been practiced in Muslim caliphates, and some of the caliphates were far more tolerant than ISIS or the Iranian Republic would be. It's not just Sharia. It's Sharia combined with a fundamentalist understanding, interpretation of the Hadiths in the Quran. Is multiculturalism failing in the West and also everywhere else? It's becoming extremely unpopular. I can only afford Popeyes at the moment. I got offers when I visit prison, make me fat, but Colonel Sanders disapproves and Domino's cries. Okay, Reinhard. Interesting perspective. If Woodrow Wilson is our worst disagreement, Polka's second worst, what is our third worst disagreement? My Substack being trash, because it's absolutely not trash. By the way, please read the definition of what disingenuous is, because that's our fourth worst argument. Let's see. We got 10 minutes. Let's see whatever questions we have. If you haven't liked and subscribed, please do so. We've had a nice, fun conversation today. How is everybody liking the new lighting and the mic? Is there a perceived difference from yesterday? Hopefully the quality of the audio and the lighting is better. I'm sorry, Harry. I just think your Substack is really poor. Ready poorly? That's all? You're complaining about my writing and you say ready pori. What do you mean? I'm still waiting for you to explain exactly what you mean about that. I don't think it's written poorly at all. Um, Charlie, you and everyone you know should have children if you want to prevent that. Okay, then. Um, why is it read poorly? Jerusalem ought to be an international independent city for all religions to make pilgrimage. Why? That's an interesting concept. Um, why can't we do that with Mecca? I know Mecca is the Muslim holy site, and Jerusalem has Christian, Muslim, and Jewish holy sites. But I mean, Muslims can go to Rome. Muslims control Istanbul, Constantinople, which has the Hagia Sophia. Christians go to Jerusalem. Jews can't go into Bethlehem. And non-Muslims, if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, don't go into Mecca. They're allowed in Saudi Arabia. I don't know about Medina, but they are not allowed in Mecca. Can't really comment as I've just discovered you, but you've got a pretty good microphone. Thank you. It's a new one. And usually I'm just speaking from YouTube. So, what political system was Hong Kong under before CCP rule? The British controlled it for a century, and as Harry will tell you, and as Harry told me, the people of Hong Kong really wanted to stay there. It's your own unique writing style, and it doesn't catch the reader's eye like some of the most popular books. What does that mean? That's just vague. Hassan Corzo and Gayahan, can you maybe speak to the microphone and lighting? Let me know if it's better, if you guys think it's an improvement. It was Christian. It was Roman. It was Greek. It was Roman. It was Christian. Byzantium was the ancient city, and that's where we get Byzantine Empire from, by the way. You can go to the Vatican. You don't need to be a Christian to visit the Vatican. Yes, that's my point. You can be a Muslim and go to the Vatican. You can be a Jew. You can be an atheist and go to the Vatican. That doesn't have the same standard in Mecca. I want to go to Mecca. I want to see the Kaaba. I want to show deference. Why can't I? Good. I'm glad the sound is better. The lighting, hopefully, is a little bit better. I've got one behind and one in front of me. So I'm maybe a little bit lit up a little bit more. Yeah. Thank you, Gayan. Okay, why do you think the ancient Egyptian culture lasted almost 3,000 years? That's an interesting question. I think that you have different dynasties, you have a change of government, you have flexibility, you have new advancements and new achievements. You kind of have a layer cake of change and development of the society within Egypt. You don't have a formidable opponent. You have the Sinai Desert protecting you from the Mesopotamians and the Assyrians. However, the Assyrians and the Nubians from the south were able to conquer Egypt at different times in their history. So it's not like they were impenetrable. The Hyksos did it. The Hittites and the Sea Peoples challenged them. But Egypt was able to survive because whoever ended up in Egypt found the Egyptian society to be extremely impressive. So whether that was the Ptolemaic dynasty of the Greeks or that was the Romans, some of the Romans liked to worship the Egyptian gods and considered the emperor to be a pharaoh. The concept of the pharaoh, the concept of all these things was extremely popular. So the people who conquered Egypt, the Nubians and the Hyksos and the Assyrians, I think they found the Egyptian culture to be so likable that they were perfectly okay with continuing to continue the traditions if they could have the prestige, wealth, and power of the Egyptians and the access to the Nile. Then why not continue the practice of worshiping Set, Osiris, and Isis? And why not continue the practice at the same time of being the pharaoh, of having all of this glamour and power, of having the hieroglyphics, of having everything made about you? It's quite fascinating to me. Great question, Ed. Let me see. What is wrong with my writing style? Still waiting for it. In 1909, the British compensated Boers in South Africa for 9.5 million pounds for the destruction of infrastructure. They also compensated British slave owners after the trade ended, but nothing for slaves. Yeah, sounds about right. Because racism. It's not like the British just stopped being racist when they ended slavery. What happened to the ancient Egyptians? What I just said. Eventually the Romans conquered them and kind of just stopped the practice of the pharaohs. But people were worshiping Egyptian gods well into the Roman Empire. What is your opinion on who the sea people were? I think they were different people from the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean, from different islands. They weren't necessarily Greek, but they had some Grecian, Hellenistic influences. And I think they were tribal peoples who eventually settled on the coastlines of Palestine and also, of course, attacked the Egyptians. Arson, you're a tough crowd. What happened to the ancient Egyptians? I already answered that. The most popular books are written in a fact-based way. Your Substack is written like you are trying to be appealing to the reader with the subtle jokes, and it creates awkward transitions in what you say. Okay, then. Fair enough. But I'm not writing a book about facts. In fact, actually, if you read the Substack honestly, you'll find that there are tons of facts thrown into almost every sentence. So I don't even understand where that's coming from. And there's Simon. Good to see you, Simon. Don't worry that you're late. Glad that you're here. Yes, and you've got the new. And Simon, you can maybe speak to the new lighting and the new mic that we got. We just put up today. Except we could have Hong Kong Island because that wasn't at least that was sovereign British territory. Interesting. Simon's British. The most popular books are written in a fact-based way. Your Substack is written like you were trying. You already said that. It's the best way I can describe it. I just don't think you like what I say because it's not right-wing enough. No, it was the British government had just declared, okay, you guys are talking in the chat. Rivers have always been important to trade and production. The cold waters in northern Russia are less productive than the oceans on Ukraine's coast. That's fair. So that's why you got the development of the Kievan Rus as the first major civilization in Eastern Europe and Russia. But also that applies to the Egyptian thing. You've got the largest or second largest river in the world, and you have a development of a culture around it. So obviously, with that and the growing of grain, Egypt gets an advantage that the other civilizations in their area don't have, and so it's easier for their civilization to become dominant and wealthy. And then people look at their culture and say their culture must be successful too, and then it goes on perpetually to the point where you're standing on ceremony honoring it like the ancient Greeks did with the Ptolemaic dynasty. Even though they have been conquered by the Greeks were very happy to assimilate into the Egyptian society. Any documentation on Down syndrome people through history? Any stories of royals with the condition out there? I'm thinking Charles the Third, the King of Spain, the Habsburgs, the long chin. Interbreeding would lead to different physical conditions and disabilities. I don't know if you could quite say Down syndrome, but yes, stuff like that. Let me see. Yes, and Britain did spend a lot of money trying to free slaves. That's very true. I have never heard about Down syndrome. Yeah, they don't get as much attention. People with that were labeled with different issues. Again, I mean, the girls who were probably suffering from an epileptic seizure were labeled as possessed at Salem. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to charge my phone, so I'm going to have to move away from the good lighting. Let's see. Give me a minute, guys. Okay, can you guys see me? Okay, I don't know what's happening. Okay, so can you guys hear me? Are we back? All right, so let's see here. I don't know why that happened, but we're back. We've got about 5 minutes left. Which YouTuber non-historian would you collab with for a casual live? Oh, probably a sports channel. I don't know. I mean, excuse me, probably sports because I do love sports. I just don't talk about it that much. I'm just wondering what you're thinking, Harsh. I'm not trying to push you or put pressure on you so you say something blunt. You usually say something blunt, then I ask you why, then you explain yourself with more subtlety like you just did. It didn't come off as rude. It seemed rude at the time, but it's clearly not rude in retrospect. You just don't like the style of writing I do. But thank you for saying it's good for the channel. Thank you for amending. So let's see, where are we? Lonnie, you got your shout out. Who's your team? Steelers and football. There, I'll give one away. You can guess where I live now. What happened to the supposed Tartarian Empire? Is this a fairy tale? Fairy tale. I eat one meal every other day. Thoughts? Oh, you're good at intermittent fasting. I wish I was that good at it. Can you talk about the false flag attack on Gleiwitz? I don't know about that. Good. Glad that we're good. Good to see everybody. Let me see. I'm looking for the chat. Um, okay, making sure I've answered all the questions. Okay, I'm caught up to the chat now. Why did we stop hearing from Hellenic pagans in the early Middle Ages? There were still some around. There were, but they were either killed off or forced into conversion. As the Christian kingdoms emerged in those areas, it was very common to persecute people who were, pagans, seen as pagans. Okay, you're in constant disappointment because of the Cowboys. I understand that. But you got 5 rings, so that's pretty good. Wait, are you on about American football or actual football? Just because America is just throw and catch the egg, and if someone gets touched, you've got to stop the game. You mean if somebody gets bodied to the floor and thrown down? I know it's not as sophisticated as cricket, but yeah, Harry, I'm talking about American football. The American football where you can score more than 3. Your thoughts on how much older the peopling of America seems to be? I think it's about 10 to 20,000. I think that's a fair dating period. It just seems to be migration at the end of the Mesolithic, beginning of the Neolithic Stone Age that was common throughout all the world that eventually led to people settling down and farming becoming popular. I just think that's when that started to happen over here. If you want to hear about real sport, you want to know about real sport, go play rugby. Rugby is a real sport. Yes, but the British also have cricket, so it goes both ways. Also, Harry, don't talk about how I need a filter. You argue with everyone in the chat like a flamethrower. Oh, great. Harry and Hars are at it again. If I were to want to co-host, to answer Reynard's question, if I wanted to co-host something, it would be Harry and Hars debating capitalism versus socialism. Because I think that would be fantastic to have somebody who hates my writing yet puts up my Substack link arguing with somebody who is a national socialist about socialism. I think that would be so much fun. Somebody who's based versus somebody who is a national socialist. Or someone who likes to think he's based. That would be fun. I would actually really enjoy that. We'll have to figure out a way to do that. We'd have to all go live at the same time. Have a hate-friendly history day. You had that on Friday. Then you had a part 2 on Saturday. Fortunately, today has not been as bad. Why do superheroes wear underwear over their pants? Because they're dumb. Were Spartan soldiers really that badass? Yeah. Pretty much. Watch my video on the Spartans versus the Greeks. Not only were the Spartan soldiers hardcore, their women were hardcore too. Yes. I don't like when you call somebody late and disingenuous, but I'll call someone else an idiot. The two of you really need to have a debate. Is that so? In mime school system, we learned that the Tartarian Empire was something like the Mongol Empire, mostly horse-riding nomads, never penetrated deep into Europe. They were not as successful or expansive. But see, when people mention Tartaria, there's different Tartars. The Tartar Empire was a leftover of the Chagatai Khanate, which controlled vast swathes of land in Eurasia, Kazakhstan, and parts of Russia. And the Russians eventually defeated and conquered most of them under Ivan the Terrible and other rulers. And this guy, Mikhail Romanov, the first Romanov Tsar. That's what my background is today. Nice historical background for a nice historical day. Yes, that would be fun. Your views are disingenuous, but don't take them personally. No, it's not disingenuous to have a differing viewpoint than yours. You just don't like what I have to say. So let's see here. How did San Francisco get so many Tinkerbells? They had a lot of Peter Pans. Is it true the Spartans gave their retarded children name to the Howlets? Yes, they also put out children to die if they did not think they were physically strong enough. We should have a members only live stream and stuff like that. That would be a lot of fun. If we get enough members, we can do that. Members, if you join, if you want to support the channel financially, members can join, and they get early access, extra videos, extra shorts, stuff like that, including I'm working on a series on the Industrial Revolution. I've already made a video about it, but I'm going to be making some more exclusive videos that will be for members only with the Industrial Revolution, so that's an option as well. Yes, I used the R word. Yes, so what? I was reading a comment. I don't like using it, so yeah. Was World War I really caused because of the murder of Franz Ferdinand? The First World War was in the 1750s, the 7 Years' War, but the Second World War was caused by Franz Ferdinand and basically the Austro-Hungarians exploiting and extorting the Serbians, leading to a war. The Russians backed up the Serbians. The Germans attacked the Russians as they had promised, and then France and Britain got involved. Britain, especially after the Germans violated Belgian neutrality to attack France to unleash their Schlieffen Plan, where they took out France first and then went after Russia. And then, of course, the Ottoman Turks joined to regain their prestige. The Italians betrayed their treaty with the Austro-Hungarians and Germans and got involved. 2 years later, the United States, China, Japan, and Argentina were all involved in the war as well. Developmentally delayed. That's a better way of saying it. Yes, they do make sense. They're perfectly sensible. They're based in fact. They are not just disingenuous views. Disingenuous would be pretending to not know something that I clearly know. Could you make it so that members and mods have access to a live stream, or would it be just members? I could try. I don't know if I can do that. I could maybe gift you a membership or something like that, or gift you the link or something. So, let's see here. Can you just refer to World War I as the war that the rest of the world recognizes as World War I? No. It's World War II. You don't like it, talk to Steve. Steve's always telling me to correct myself, and I'm like, no, correct yourself. It's my channel. I get to have my opinions. We learned the hard way this weekend that somehow me having opinions on particular issues is wrong. I cannot have opinions on particular issues, or I will be disingenuous, or I will be an idiot, or I will want more dead children in Gaza, just because I don't share a particular perspective. I'm not objectively wrong. I'm not. I think that there's really strong conceivable evidence that the 7 Years' War is World War I. Watch my video on it, Joshua. If you disagree after that, that's fine. People are allowed to call it World War I. I don't punish people for calling it World War I. I will always clarify what I believe to be a fascinating factoid of this channel is that we stand with World War II being the Great War and World War III being the war of the Nazis and the Japanese. Past history can say about the future of a country. You can look at trends and see how countries rise and fall. Look at the Roman Empire and how they fell. Corruption, greed, hyperinflation, overextension of resources, inability to mobilize an army, infrastructural breakdown. Tartaria, yeah, there's also the Tartaria of the supposed island, or supposed, not island, that's Atlantis, the supposed advanced civilization that was beyond any other, that didn't exist. No, you're right, T. I appreciate you correcting me. I don't like saying it any more than anyone else. But then why are some African Americans trying and say Tartarians are real, Native Americans, and they are black people in America, Native Americans aren't real? Because every civilization has origin stories and legends in which they make their civilization, their ethnos, or their race look superior to others because in the past they make the argument that they were superior. It's the argument that they were all kings in Africa. They certainly were not. So the argument of incredible, in some of the European origin stories have just as much fiction in them as do the others. So, and it's the argument that the Native Americans were completely living in peace and harmony. It's the argument that the Europeans made everything better everywhere they went. It's this idea of individual national superiority that's totally based on race. So yes. Yes, you having opinions friendly is like wanting kids to die. That's insane. That is what those nut jobs on Friday were saying. It wasn't that they were saying that basically because I won't call what's happening in Gaza a genocide, I have to wait to see more kids die to call it a genocide, which is absolutely despicable. I am not waiting for anything but the end of that war and peace in that region. I mean, I cannot believe that. Yes, but basically, if I have an opinion, I must want bad things. Because that's the way our world works today. You have an opinion that's different than mine and are willing to defend it and stand up for it on your own platform. You want bad thing. That's why I made that "You Want Bad Thing" video that I got from Freedom Tunes. That was funny. When Europeans fight each other, it's a world war. Yeah, that's the funny thing. Because the Europeans have fought each other many times, and they don't call it a world war. What makes the 7 Years' War a world war is the Indians, both American and South Indian, that fought in it. You've got Spain bringing its empire, Portugal bringing its empire. You've got enough to call it a world war. So yeah, Kiara, good to see you. Sorry, you're joining us right at the end here. Did Carolus Rex really defeat those nations at 15 years old? I don't know. Is that Carlos Rex? Is that Charlemagne? So, what is the conclusion of history about what's going to happen in Iran in a close future? I don't know. I don't see the Islamic Revolution losing power and the Islamic Republic collapsing in Iran anytime soon. And I don't. Yeah. Ammon in Jordan used to be called Philadelphia by the ancient Greeks. They called it the city of brotherly love before the Americans. That's fascinating. Most of the cities in America are just named after things from other countries and areas. Let me see.
Wilson did several bad things that prevented us from winning the war better and hurt our chances, yet you still said in the past that he should get credit for winning it. He is the president in charge of the country when they won the World War. I didn't say that he ran it perfectly or managed it perfectly. Lincoln didn't manage the Civil War perfectly, yet we say he won that war. FDR didn't manage the last World War correctly, so yes. So yes, I know that there's a difficulty for you to see to give any credit to Woodrow Wilson because you're disingenuous. But yes, that's what I think. And I think your show and opinions are great, even if we don't agree. Exactly, you don't have to agree. Don't agree. I mean, even Simon doesn't agree with everything I say, I'm sure. But he doesn't make a point of making a huge argument about it. And even if he does, like Harry and Harst do, they don't then make claims about my character as a person. They just think, oh, I think this is disingenuous. No, none of them have ever gotten close enough to say you really don't care about dying children in the world because you're being paid by AIPAC, I guess is the argument. What if Saxony formed a coalition with the other pagans against Charlemagne? Wouldn't have done anything. Charlemagne was too brutal and too strong. I just don't see how they could have defeated him. Yep, it's my opinion. I'm allowed to believe that the First World War was in the 1750s. Some people think the Napoleonic Wars were a world war. I don't. But that's okay. Let me see here. Let me see. I see a future where you are offered a contract by PBS or History Channel or something, and I turned down both of them because I don't like either of them. Woodrow Wilson managed the Great War very badly, not because of anything he shouldn't be blamed for, but because he purposefully caused the issue, and you still said he deserves credit. Very disingenuous. I don't agree with that. Let me make something very clear to you. You've just triggered dark friendly history. I don't agree. I don't agree that he is responsible for all that. You are applying a standard to me that I don't believe in and then saying I'm being disingenuous because I don't agree because I'm not living by a standard that I've already said I don't agree with, which in itself is disingenuous. Jeez. And I thought we were going to get through today without any problems. Then did pretty much no finding. Yes, you guys needed us, Harry. Oh, anyways. Jeez. I'm probably more left than you. However, I'm less educated, so go figure. I mean, I don't share my political beliefs, Simon. I mean, I try to be fair to every single person when I speak about politics in a particular way. And so you have no idea how left I actually am. I hit at both sides. I hit when I talk about geopolitics. And so it's not, I mean, Brits tend to be more liberal than Americans, so maybe there's that, but I don't share my political beliefs. And even if I share it based on geopolitics, I'm very critical from a historical perspective of both sides. Because objectivity is my goal. Oh, geez. Woody the Woodpecker is not named after Woodrow Wilson. This is the Friendly History Channel. Come back tomorrow for another crash out. You don't agree that Wilson signed the papers to make the different boards that micromanaged the Great War. That's ignoring facts. I never said I don't agree with that. I never said that. I just don't think that caused us to almost lose the war. Yes. Listen to yes. Joshua clearly thinks I'm a lefty. Harry clearly thinks that I'm on the right. People think different things about me. You're allowed to think different things. I don't share my perspectives on these things, so keep guessing. Just like I don't share my age, my religion, or where I live exactly. Keep guessing. What extent can we see the origins of modern state sovereignty and the resulting break from Rome? That's a great question, Kiara. As always, you ask such good questions. But you obviously have a development of different groups like the Franks and the Saxons who develop kingdoms and that become England and France. The Holy Roman Empire is kind of the resurrected version of the Roman Empire, and it eventually takes root in Germany. But truly, the modern nation state really doesn't emerge until after the end of the religious wars in Europe, where there was this idea of, okay, we're going to focus more on political identity of a nation based off of its population. That comes with the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. How did Henry VIII's personal and political motivations in pursuit of an annulment from Catherine of Aragon intervene with the broader European religious and diplomatic landscape? He definitely. Oh, to what extent can we see the origins of modern? Oh, in the break from. Oh, his break from. Yes, you can see more of that. You have England developing a state church that is obviously Protestant and then disenfranchising many of the Catholics. That obviously is huge. The French do have a similar struggle of, are they going to go the same way? But their monarch doesn't change his religion. You have more of a rebellion and civil wars called the French Wars of Religion during the 16th century. it definitely adds to it. The religious wars lead to the eventual creation of nation states because people basically decide we're not going to survive as a continent, as a people, as Europeans, if we just continue to fight each other relentlessly because of our religious differences between Catholics and Protestants. So yeah. The Napoleonic Wars were more of a continental war that spill over outside of Europe. It's up there, though, in terms of scale. Yes, absolutely, but that's just because of the sheer mass volume of power that Napoleon had. Well, Harry, to be fair, almost everybody is to the right of you. I mean, you are a National Socialist, so there's that. So you do not think that we had significant issues regarding World War I, regarding Woodrow Wilson's decisions. I'm not saying we didn't. I'm saying he did some good things. I'm hardcore left. See, and that's fine. I have people from all different backgrounds, with all different political perspectives who come and learn about history, because that's what we do here. We're not a political channel. We're a historical channel. We talk about politics. We talk about it in a fair and balanced way. Just the way I do my daily news updates, I do it objectively, because I'm sick and tired of the way the media misrepresents everything because they're political shills. They really are. What was the best infantry rifle in World War I? Is the Enfield in World War I? I think so. Or I call it World War II, but I think I'm going to go with that one. Do you think the Muslim conquest washed out much of the Hellenistic Greek culture of Asia? To some extent. It definitely did it in Anatolia and eventually in Greece. Tried to do it in Greece itself. Yeah, he doesn't get any credit for the 19th Amendment in my book. Wilson opposed the 19th Amendment and was jailing suffragettes. Yeah, Reds was John Reed's 10 Days That Changed the World and his experience in Russia. It's a just like the book itself, it's a melodramatic, romanticized idea of a horrible event in human history that led to the deaths of millions of people. Not to say that the Russian Revolution was a bad idea necessarily, but over-romanticizing it. I love what Sean McKeon, one of my favorite historians, says about the Russian Revolution, that people like John Reed and a bunch of other fellow travelers and communists who observed it saw what they wanted to saw and ignored the rest during what was happening in the late 19-teens and early 1920s in Russia. It's a fantastic movie in that it's well made. It's got some of the best actors in it, but it's a romanticized telling of a romanticized movie of a romanticized story from a Marxist journalist trying to justify a really, really uproariously chaotic event. The older I get, the more conservative I get. Also, I really hate when the government tramples on the Constitution. Fair enough, have your perspectives. My specialty is indeed Russia. I think it is the older you get, the more moderate you get. That could be part of it. I'm over 1,000 years too late. Okay, interesting, YouTube. I can't really avoid politics if doing history. You can't really avoid it, but you can talk about it in a reasonable way, which is why I don't use this platform to slam Donald Trump. I mean, I look at, and the reason I can, and I do sometimes when I think that there's something historically interesting and important about what's happening, and he's just being historically numbskulled. But I'm looking at everything through history, or trying to. So if I'm talking about a political issue, I'm going to look at the history around it. That I also don't like the catastrophizing that modern politics does. So that's why I constantly say on the channel, people who say we've never seen anything like Donald Trump before are ignorant. Andrew Jackson was at least as bad. If you look at the bravado and the brutishness and the rudeness of Andrew Jackson, Teddy Roosevelt definitely was pretty intense. Richard Nixon, Trump's a dictator. I mean, so was FDR by that standard. So you want to mitigate all of the bad Woodrow Wilson did in order to give him credit for any good. We have to search the ends of history, the earth, and for twist history. So much for Wilson. Yes, that's clearly what I've done with Woodrow Wilson. See, what you want is just to be unfairly punishing of Woodrow Wilson. I want to give him his due day in court, just like I just did with Donald Trump. And the reason I do this for almost all historical figures, you're allowed to say historical figures are bad if it's obvious what they did caused horrible, horrible things to happen. But the reason I listen to every historical character in their context, like the Austrian painter who was living in an anti-Semitic society and obviously was heavily influenced by the anti-Semitic mayor of Vienna, the fact of the matter is, even with context, you can still say something is good or bad. But at the same time, every historical figure deserves his day in court. Because one day I'm going to be part of it, I'm going to be gone, and people are going to maybe look at me or look at people like me, and I don't want to be judged too harshly. I want people to understand why I did what I did. And I don't know that every single person has good intentions, but I think a lot of people do. I know you've probably explained this before, but could you explain the World War One in the 1750s? I'm new to the channel. Well, 1031, the 7 Years' War, which I have an entire video on, was this First World War. It involved fighting in Asia, North America, Europe, and even parts of, and of course, parts of Africa, and of course, in the ocean, the Atlantic. So, a healthy society shouldn't seek to strictly classify itself as liberal or conservative or left or right or red or blue. Need more diversity of thought and informed contrarianism. Very true. And one of the reasons that I think the right is ascendant in many areas is because the right tends to be more inclusive of thought. The right wasn't debanking and deplatforming people. But at the same time, I think that gives them the ability to stand on a high precipice. But the truth of the matter is, both political sides in all countries, both the right and the left, need to realize that very few people are actually going to fit an orthodox version of the left or the right. The vast majority of people are going to have shades of, if they're right-leaning, they're going to have shades of the right, but not all of it. They're going to have shades of the left, and this is how it's always been. The people in the middle tend to be pickers and choosers. They tend to be buffet style conservatives or liberals, and some of them are more conservative, more liberal, are pushed that way. Some people take a gamble on how they feel about things. Some people don't have a basic idea, but just kind of make an assumption. And a lot of people don't care and stay out of politics almost altogether. So there's a lot of ability for people on the right to be inclusive of people, but that doesn't mean that they're always good at at understanding why people are not conservative. And it used to be the right was the one that was very bad at understanding people being different than them. Now it seems to be the left that is doing that. Without getting into controversy and without considering your personal beliefs, which religion do you think has been the most devastating of all? I think it's all based on time period. I think in the medieval period, Christianity was extremely devastating for a lot of people. And I think in the modern world, Islam has kind of taken that moniker. Hinduism is more of a national religion. So it's had some devastating results, but it's hard to compare Hinduism to Christianity and Islam in that sense because it's not a global religion. Judaism, the same thing. It's a controversial question, and I want to show deference and respect to all world religions and beliefs. And I think it is subjective to some extent based on which historical period you're living in. Although we do understand a lot more his geopolitical beliefs because he does share them to an extent. Yes, I share my geopolitical beliefs only based on what I see from history and what I see happening now and what I can judge will happen next because of the history. But I don't I think it's just very fair-minded for somebody to say, I don't like that Ukrainians are dying, and if they have to give out the Donetsk, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Or at the same time saying, just saying, I don't like Gazan children dying, and maybe there's another way to free the hostages. That's not a terrible opinion. I think that's very moderate, and I think it's very just based on some sort of common decency that I don't want more people to die. But I understand that war is messy. I understand war is happening, and I understand people die in wars. Is it crazy to be pro-peace? That's not a controversial left or right-wing position. So that would be my idealistic idea. But other than that, I'm totally informed on what I see historically in the region, in the area, in the context. Yep, basically that's what happened, Rodolfo. People exaggerate the heck out of the Orange Man. Yes, and something that maybe a couple of the people here who are Trump supporters, there's several of them, could speak to is the fact that people who like him, who supported him, who voted for him, they're tired of him too. They're just less tired. They like some of the things he's done. Most of his supporters generally just tend to be like, yeah, I can't stand him, but hey, I like a secure border. I like crime being swept up in cities. I actually like the National Guard in cities and stuff like that. It's one of those things where it's what Bill Maher said. The crazy thing about Trump is that his supporters don't like him either. They just hate the left. Andrew Jackson was a gangster dude, challenged people to duels, had a bullet in his body, Ted, because he's a fascinating guy. Not a great person, in my opinion, but a fascinating guy. Ike was a great president, to be sure, absolutely. Maybe the most underrated president in history. Do you think history will look at Trump in a balanced way? Contemporary history, media, we don't look at Trump in a balanced way, so I don't expect long history to do it unless there's some sort of radical justification of most of what he stood for and did. Be it, if he ends the war in Ukraine, if the tariffs end up bringing back American manufacturing like he says, then maybe. But, this guy can't do anything without being referred to as a felon. So I don't. So Hewetzer, it's a great question. I don't think that that's going to happen because look at how history has judged him so far. Yes, please sell all my information for a reasonable fee and then give it back to the channel. Who were Hitler's heroes? Who inspired him? It's a great question. He was clearly inspired by the Romans. Mussolini was one of his heroes. I think Hitler basically respected anyone who was violent and militaristic. I think he definitely wanted some sort of Napoleon-like glory for himself. I think any militant leader in the 19th century, especially in Europe, looked up to Napoleon. Of putting Woodrow Wilson in, what was the outcome of putting Woodrow Wilson in court? What do you mean by that? Yes, it is my smoking jacket. Good to see you, Faraz. Sam Hyde. And yeah, I've heard that before, Ted. Individuals as intense and controversial as Trump have always ended up in the history books. This has happened repeatedly throughout time and undoubtedly will continue to happen. Yes, and people who will look back on them, and some of them will love them, and a lot of people will really dislike them. Yes. Funny. Let me see here. I'm going to catch up to the... I haven't caught up to the chat. I'm sorry. We're going to have to end it, guys. I've gone 25 minutes over answering all of your great questions. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't. I'm not going to be able to get through all of it. There's 3 Abrahamic religions, technically. But you could be right in saying that there are 2. It's my Hugh Hefner smoking jacket, mildly. No one takes Kamala seriously. I mean, she didn't have much of a chance based on how little time she had. How come Earth 13 billion years ago and last 20 years mobile phones can't be coincidence? It's the ability, every comment, to... It's this kind of stratified exponential growth of technological development. In the last 200 years, human beings have expanded greatly. In the last 20 years, they've expanded greatly, even compared to the 180 years before that. So yeah. I'm looking for the comments just quickly, getting some last answers. So can you explain the role that coffee played in the advent of algebra? I don't know exactly what role it played. I mean, coffee was extremely popular in Muslim societies, and the Muslims are the ones who developed algebra. Is it true that Lincoln was leftist for his time and Confederates rightist? Wait, no, I almost don't want to put them in a political category, but I don't like the historical narrative that overnight suddenly the Republicans became the Democrats and the Democrats became Republicans, because I believe it's a historical oversimplification. I don't think Lincoln was necessarily a left-winger or a socialist. I don't think that the Confederates were necessarily conservative Republicans. We look at that because the South now is pretty conservative, but and blacks vote overwhelmingly Democratic. But there are so many reasons why. The blacks in America vote Democratic heavily because of FDR, not because of the Civil Rights Act. They were already voting heavily Democratic in the 1930s because of FDR's New Deal programs. Why Industrial Revolution happened in England? The demand for textile production was huge for the British, and they built the first textile mills, and they were kind of isolated enough from the Europeans to do that. And I'm wondering if Napoleon's embargo or forced embargo in the continental system had anything to do with them growing that even further, but it was already there before Napoleon, but took off more so in the first couple decades of the 19th century, and then was spread to other places. So the demand for textiles led to innovation. This is the invisible hand, the need for demand and the need to meet those demands. This is what Adam Smith was talking about just before the rise of the Industrial Revolution. Oh, Rando, it's good. I got you here right before we signed off. I'm sorry, we're at the very end, but it's good to see you. So what is your exact view of Woodrow Wilson after court? Friendly history. I think he's a highly overrated president. I don't think he's that great. I think he gets way too much credit for most of the things he did, and I think he did a couple of things right. I don't want to put him at the bottom of the barrel, but it comes down, I think a lot of people, when they think of Woodrow Wilson, it comes down to their politics, because he was kind of a lefty, and also he was a progressive, and also you got the Federal Reserve. So what do you think about those things is how you determine Woodrow Wilson. You cannot deny he was a huge racist. You cannot deny that he was a micromanager. You cannot deny that he was an idealist who really didn't understand how the world worked. But a lot of people don't necessarily believe that. So let me see. Yep. Thank you so much, everyone. Can garlic be acceptable? Garlic's very acceptable in good cooking. Let me see. I like to watch people voted against their own emergency and health services. Yep, that's very American of us. Who do you think is the most overrated American president? Ooh, overrated? FDR. Woodrow Wilson's up there, too. Most people love him, but I think Harris makes a good point. You can't really deny a lot of the facts about Wilson's racism, his micromanaging of the war, the 14 points peace plan not really working out, the League of Nations being a failure. But I will say that if the United States had followed Wilson into the League of Nations, the next World War probably wouldn't have happened. Yeah, greatest spice. It's garlic's up there, cinnamon. Those are definitely some of them. Yeah. You guys can watch my videos on FDR and Woodrow Wilson and the U.S. presidents and get more details about that. He also let the KKK do whatever they wanted, and then, true, very true. But then again, so did Calvin Coolidge. So, Birth of a Nation. Yep. D.W. Griffith. What about the fact that he was ultra racist? Yes, he was. He was definitely not only a victim of his time, but a perpetuator of the violence of his time. And you learned that kind of fact from this channel. Isn't that a great way to finish this chat? And I think they waited as long as possible to not have to vote about her candidacy, and they could push Kamala as a candidate for the Democrats. She just didn't have enough time to mount a formidable fight against Trump, and she really hurt herself with some of her decisions. But yes, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure to like the stream, like Joshua suggests, on your way out. Please take care. Have a great rest of your Sunday. We went a half an hour extra just for you guys to get your questions answered. We will join you. We will be back tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern, for our live stream lecture about Labor Day itself, which I'm really looking forward to. So I hope you guys really enjoy that. Thank you for all that you guys do. Thank you to my wonderful moderators who did a great job with the chat. Thank you. Yeah, I don't know who I'm thanking at this point. Make sure to show some love to my moderators in the chat before you head out. Follow our social medias that Harsh put in the chat, even the Substack, even though it's not really good writing. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. Have a great rest of your night. Join us tomorrow. Check out the long-form videos that drop every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern, the shorts that drop every day. And as always, love history. Bye-bye now.